Crime Crazy by Seven Anderton. Illustrated by William Meelink. A northwest gale was tearing along the streets and across the rooftops of the prairie town of Shelbyville. It was the 3rd of December, and the thermometer registered 2 degrees above zero. Light snow that had fallen during the day was being swept into drifts in hollows and sheltered places. The streets were practically deserted. It was a night for staying in a snug home. But murder was abroad, stalking a victim in Shelbyville for the first time in the town's history. In the lobby of the Shelby Hotel, it was Annie's Kendall vanished into thin air and started a trail that was spotted with murder, deceit, and double-crossing. When my old friend Masters took a hand, we had some real tough going to unravel the 7-year-old mystery. Gibson fired again, and Hayes staggered against the cabinet, warm and cozy. I sat in my favorite leather-covered chair reading a Sioux City newspaper. I had lived in the hotel during the 2 years since I had purchased the Shelbyville Clarion, published twice weekly. Across the lobby, Nick Summers, the middle-aged night clerk, was playing cribbage with a pudgy grocery salesman. Tom Dennison, night bellboy and porter, sat on the edge of a rocking chair and watched the game. The street door opened and a man entered. His dark overcoat and hat glistened with particles of frozen snow. He was Dan Travis, a detective from Chicago. Travis, an ace operator for the Brent Investigation Service, had been in Shelbyville about 3 weeks. He was investigating the nearly 7-year-old James Kendall case. Outsiders had investigated the Kendall case at least a score of times since James Kendall had apparently vanished into the air. Local police had long since decided that the case would never be solved. All former investigations had netted nothing, and Shelbyville citizens were beginning to marvel at the tenacity of Dan Travis. "Hell of a night," Travis said as he closed the door. "Any mail for me, Mr. Summers?" "Not a thing, Mr. Travis," the clerk replied. Tom Dennison went behind the counter and handed Travis a key. Travis laid down a nickel and took a newspaper from a stack on the cigar counter. "I hope it's warm in my room," he said. "I'm keeping the furnace red hot," the porter told him. "Good night." The old-fashioned clock above the desk struck 9 as Travis mounted the stairs. He had room 209 at the far end of the second-floor corridor. His footsteps faded down the carpeted hall. Then the report of a gun echoed through the building. The pudgy salesman dropped the cards he was preparing to deal. The 4 of us in the lobby exchanged startled glances. The sound of a heavy fall and running feet mingled with the echoes of the shot. A door slammed. "Upstairs," Tom Dennison gasped. The 4 of us moved towards the stairs. We reached the top in a close group. The hall was lighted by a single and not too powerful bulb. We ran down the corridor to where Dan Travis lay on the floor before the door of room 209. I knew Travis was dead by the wide-open eyes and total lack of expression. I had seen a lot of dead men in the South Pacific, but I felt for a pulse and tried for breath with a mirror. Travis still wore his overcoat and I saw no blood. "I think he's dead," I said, "but call a doctor and the police." "I'll call." Tom Dennison hurried away. "I wonder where Bert Larrabee is." Nick Summers pointed at an open door halfway down the corridor. A light was burning in the room, but it was unoccupied. "Bert went up to his room an hour ago," the clerk added. I felt a pang of fear. Besides myself, the pudgy salesman, and Dan Travis, Bert Larrabee was the only other guest in the hotel that night. Nick Summers had remarked a short while before that the weather had put business on the bum. Larrabee, a good-looking youngster of 25, operated a linotype machine at the Clarion and helped me with other work. I had good reason for my fear for him. He was an ex-convict. This, I believed, was known in Shelbyville only to myself and Dan Travis, and we kept our mouths shut. Larrabee had been recognized by Travis on the 2nd day after the detective's arrival in town. I had prevailed upon Travis to keep the youngster's secret, arguing that Bert was trying hard to make good and could not possibly have had anything to do with the Kendall case. "Maybe Bert went to the movie," I said. "And you didn't see him leave? And left his door open and the light burning?" Summers shook his head. In the silence, we heard the howl of the gale. The 2-story frame hotel trembled. "Swell night for murder," the pudgy salesman observed. Nick Summers shivered. Downstairs a door slammed. Todd Gibson, chief of Shelbyville's 3-man police force, mounted the stairs. The police station was in the town hall on a side street just a block from the hotel. Dr. Paul Cooper was only a moment behind the chief. They went to the body. The breast of Travis's overcoat was now soaked with blood. After a brief look, Chief Gibson turned and questioned the three of us, while Dr. Cooper partly undressed and examined the body. "He's dead," the doctor announced presently. "Shot through the heart. Better get him over to Ender's mortuary. I'll have a good look there." "You tend to that, Doc," the chief said. "Killer must have gone down these stairs." He pointed to a stairway that led down to a back door. "I'll have—" The sound of the back door opening silenced Gibson. The door closed and Bert Larrabee, hatless and coatless, bounded up the stairs. The knee of Bert's trousers was torn. His brown hair was awry from the wind, his face red from the cold. He was breathing hard. His eyes swept waiting group. "He got away," Bert puffed. "I opened my door after the shot and heard him running down the stairs. I took after him. When I got outdoors, I could see him running north down the alley. But it was too dark to tell who he was. I chased him, but I got tangled in some wire and fell on an orange crate behind Red's store. Time I got untangled and got to the end of the alley, he wasn't in sight. He had turned west, so I ran that way for a couple of blocks and looked in all directions. I didn't see him again." "You never saw anybody in the first place," Chief Gibson snapped. "You shot Travis yourself. Then you chased out to hide the gun and come back with a cock and bull story." "I didn't." Larrabee's eyes sought mine pleadingly. "Why would I—" "Open and shut," Gibson declared. "I should have done something about you as soon as Travis told me you was an ex-con." "Travis? He told you?" Larrabee seemed to sag. "Uh-huh," Gibson grunted. "Told me he promised not to give you away to the town, but he thought the chief of police ought to know. Looks like a good thing he told me." I hadn't liked Gibson from our first meeting. I liked him less as time went on. In some ways he was a good officer, but he was one of those who enjoy being policemen. He had a firm conviction that everybody was guilty of something for which they could be arrested, if it could only be found out. His eagerness to expose Larrabee's past made me boil, and I tied into him. "That was dirty, Gibson," I said. "Even if you really suspect Bert, you didn't have to publish his mistake to the town. His debt to society—" "Nuts to you," Gibson cut me off. "He's an ex-con, hiding out here in your shop, and you've been helping him. You took his part when Travis recognized him and jumped him. The rat has got to be a fair-haired boy with some people in this town. He was afraid Travis would tell on him, so he killed Travis." Gibson had produced a gun and a pair of handcuffs. He handed the cuffs to Dr. Cooper. "Put the nippers on him, Doc," the chief ordered, "while I keep him covered." "Gibson," I said, "don't be a damn fool. Bert—" "Shut up," Gibson growled. "You can talk all you want to at his trial." When Gibson had taken Bert Larrabee to jail and Travis's body had been removed from the hall by Ed Enders, the undertaker, I went to my room to think what I could do to help Larrabee. My room was 206, almost directly across the hall from 209 and the second door from the top of the back stairway. I had not locked my door. The first thing I noticed when I opened it and flicked on the light was a quart bottle of whiskey standing on my stand table. The whiskey had come in an early Christmas package that morning. I had unpacked it but had not opened it. It had been unopened when I went down to the dining room at 7 o'clock. Now it was opened, and a good big drink had been taken from it. A glass that had been on a shelf above my water tap now stood beside the bottle. I picked up the glass and smelled whiskey. I looked about the room. So far as I could tell, nothing else had been disturbed. I knew Bert Larrabee had not tapped my whiskey. He had refused a drink from the bottle I kept at the office, telling me that he was a teetotaler from here on. I decided that Tom Dennison might be the guilty party and turned my thoughts to Larrabee's plight. I felt certain that Larrabee hadn't shot Travis. I sat down in the comfortable chair beside my table, filled my pipe, and reviewed what Larrabee had told me about himself when he answered my ad in a trade paper, soon after I took over the Clarion. The crime which had cost Larrabee 7 years of liberty during the best years of his youth had been committed when he was a kid of 18. Having no relatives of which he knew, Larrabee ran away from an orphanage in Indiana when he was a husky 14-year-old. He wandered and took care of himself in a haphazard manner until he got into trouble in Chicago. There, Larrabee met a man in a tavern and was offered a chance to make a lot of money easily. The man offered Bert $1,000 to set fire to a warehouse. He said it was his own place and he wanted to collect the insurance. The job would be safe. A rear window of the warehouse would be open. Some cans of gasoline would be standing on the floor in the right place. All Bert had to do was climb in at the window, upset the cans, and lay a 10-foot fuse the man would give him into the spilled gasoline. Then he could light the end of the fuse and be blocks away when the fire started. The owner would be elsewhere with a perfect alibi. Larrabee was young and broke. He fell for the man's offer. The man gave him $100 and arranged to meet him the day after the fire to give him the rest of the $1,000. But the fuse the man gave Larrabee flashed fire into the gasoline instantly. Bert ran for the window and into the guns of police who had been tipped by telephone that somebody was breaking into the warehouse. The tipster was never found. The owner of the warehouse had been in St. Louis for a week before the fire. He was not the man who had hired Larrabee. Bert described that man for police, but he was never found. The warehouse, containing much highly inflammable material, was destroyed. The owner alleged competitors had fired it to hurt his business. The insurance companies lost heavily and pressed charges. Bert was sentenced to 10 years, which good behavior and merits reduced. Larrabee had learned to operate linotype in prison and had answered my ad in the hope that he might begin to make something of his life in Shelbyville. All this Larrabee told me of his own accord and declared his intention to never do another dishonest thing. I believed him and advised him to tell no one else of his past. For 2 years he had justified my faith. He was a likable lad. He worked hard and saved money. He was all but engaged to Jane Melton, daughter of a well-to-do merchant. He had talked with me about the advisability of telling Jane about his past. I smoked and pondered on ways to help Bert. I knew that the news, in spite of the hour and the storm, would be all over town in an hour. Shelbyville was that sort of town. There was a rap at my door. Jane Melton entered at my invitation. She was a small, dark girl and pretty. She had been crying. "Oh, Mr. Porter," Jane said. "Is this awful thing true about Bert Larrabee? Chief Gibson won't let me see him." "No, Jane," I assured her. "Bert didn't kill Dan Travis." "Chief Gibson says Bert is an ex-convict, is he?" "Yes," I told her as I mentally damned Gibson. "Bert served time in Joliet, but he has paid for his mistake. Do you love him?" Jane's dark eyes dropped for a moment, then met mine bravely. "Yes, Mr. Porter, and I don't care if he was in prison. He's fine and—" She choked on a sob. "Put the nippers on him," the chief ordered, "while I keep him covered." "Listen, Jane," I said. "I think I'd better tell you about Bert. He's going to need friends now." Jane listened while I told her Bert's story. "It makes no difference to me," she said when I had finished, "and I want to tell Bert so. How can I get to see him?" "I'll arrange it," I promised, "in the morning." "Chief Gibson is mean," Jane said. "Bert wouldn't kill a man to keep a secret he was going to tell me anyhow." "No," I agreed. "I feel sure the secret of Travis's murder is tied up in this Kendall case he was investigating. What will your parents say about your seeing Larrabee in jail?" "I'll explain to them. But I'm 22, and my own boss." Jane's chief came up defiantly. The girl had spunk. "I'm going to see Harrison Gaddis right now," I told her. "I'll walk you home." Harrison Gaddis was the ablest of Shelbyville's 2 attorneys. He had heard the news and was not surprised when I called at his home at 10:30. He said he would be glad to do what he could for Bert and, at my insistence, got his wraps and went with me to the jail. Gibson was still there. He wasn't nice about it, but he let us talk to Larrabee. I delivered a message from Jane Melton that brightened Bert. Gaddis questioned him and promised to see him again in the morning. "You're making a mistake, Gibson," Gaddis said as we were leaving. "Perhaps laying yourself open to false arrest charges?" "Ain't neither," Gibson retorted. "I'm holding Larrabee for investigation. I'll find the gun he hid tonight and round up the evidence. Then I'll charge him." I slept poorly and got up at 5 o'clock. It was press day, and I must get the Clarion out without Bert Larrabee's help. Sam Brandt, my aged journeyman printer, could operate the machine well enough to set the story of the murder and the arrest of Larrabee, which I must write. The dining room didn't open until 6, but Tom Dennison said there would be coffee ready in about 10 minutes. I remembered. "Tom," I asked, "did you open the bottle of whiskey in my room?" "No, Mr. Porter." Tom grinned. but I would have if I knowed you had one up there. I sat down in a rocking chair and put my feet on a radiator to wait for Tom's coffee. As usual at that hour of the morning, Nick Summers was sleeping soundly in two of the leather chairs. The wind was still howling and peppering the lobby windows with the frozen snow. A car pulled up before the hotel, and a tall man in an ulster got out and paid the driver. The car rolled away, and the tall man carried a Gladstone bag into the lobby. I looked at the newcomer and came to my feet with a yell. "Kent Masters, by thunder!" Masters dropped the Gladstone and wrung my hand while gripping my shoulder. "Chuck Porter!" he exclaimed. "What are you doing in this godforsaken place?" "I own, operate, and try to control the local newspaper," I told him. "What brings you here?" "Murder," Kent said. "Guess you know about it. I work for the Brent Agency. Dan Travis was our man. Your police chief wired our office, said he was holding a suspect. I chartered a plane to Sioux Falls, hired a car to drive me here. I was hunting the police station when I saw the lights here." "Why all the rush?" I asked. "Tell you all about it," Master said. "But first, can't we get some coffee around here?" Our commotion had awakened Nick Summers and brought Tom Dennison from the kitchen. "Coffee's on the fire, Mr. Porter," Tom said. "There's whiskey in my room," I told Kent. "Why keep it a secret so long?" He grinned. "I'll get a room and take my bag up." "Put Mr. Masters in 208 right next to you, Mr. Porter," the clerk said when Kent had registered. He gave Kent the key. I led the way and opened the door of 208 as Kent stepped up with the key. "Unoccupied rooms are always open," I said. "That kind of a hotel, eh?" I snapped on the lights and stood looking down at a moist, dirty spot on the rug just inside the room. "What's the matter?" Kent asked at my shoulder. "That spot," I pointed. "It adds up with something else about last night." "Maybe." "How?" "Put your bag in here and come to my room. I'll tell you about it." In my room, I poured whiskey. "To old times." Kent raised his glass. We drank the whiskey neat. Kent and I hadn't heard of him in nearly 3 years. I was no more surprised to learn that he was working for the Brent people than he was to find me an editor in Shelbyville. "The spot on my rug ties in with Travis's murder?" Kent asked as I rinsed our glasses. "That and something else." I told him about the minor mystery of my whiskey and an idea that was forming in my mind. "I see," Kent nodded. "Room 208 vacant and unlocked. Your room unlocked. Careless habit. Killer sneaks in the back door, samples your whiskey and waits in 208 to shoot Travis at the door of 209 just across the hall. Dirty snow melts from the killer's shoes while he lurks. Marvelous, Watson. But why in hell did you handle that bottle and glass before they were tested for fingerprints?" I felt my face getting red. "Anyhow," Kent went on, "if your police have the killer..." "Chief Gibson has arrested an innocent man," I broke in. Then I told Kent about the events of the preceding evening. "I've met the chief's sort," Kent nodded. "I'm glad I ran into you before I met him." There was a knock at my door. "Coffee's ready," Tom Dennison called. As we ate rolls and drank coffee in the dining room, Kent explained his hasty arrival in Shelbyville. "Time is wasting on this Kendall case," he said. "If there is hanky-panky, it must be uncovered in the next 9 days. Otherwise, 2 insurance companies that the Brent service represents are stuck for $400,000. A respectable bundle, even in these times. You think there is hanky-panky?" "I've only had one night to think about it," Kent replied. "But Travis's last report indicated that he expected to turn up something fishy at any moment. Maybe he did, and that's why he was killed." "That's it," I declared. "If you could prove..." "Proof would get your Larrabee out of the pokey," Kent cut in. "And of course, I'm supposed to do what I can about Travis, but the Kendall case has priority. Time marches on. What do you know about the Kendall business?" "I've only been here 2 years," I said, "but I heard enough about the Kendall case to make me curious. I looked it up in the Clarion files. There's a pretty complete story there." "Good," Masters exclaimed, putting down his coffee cup. "Let's go to your shop. I have our file on the case. With yours to check, I should get a pretty clear picture." "I can't help," I warned him. "I have to get the paper out, and I'm short-handed." It was 6:15 when we reached the Clarion office. It was still dark. I turned on lights and showed Kent where to find the files. Then I sat down to write my lead story. Sam Brandt and Myrtle Cox would arrive soon. Myrtle was dignified by the title of society editor. She gathered local news, solicited advertising and subscriptions, collected bills, and read some proof. A high school senior who edited the school page completed my staff. Shortly after 9, Harrison Gaddis came to tell me that he had been to see Larrabee, introduced Kent Masters, and stated his business in town. Jane Melton went with me, Gaddis said. She took Larrabee some breakfast. So did 3 other people. Reverend Mackley visited him. Others tried to. Chief Gibson is sore. I don't think this is going to do young Larrabee standing in the town much harm. How soon can we get him released? I asked. I'll furnish bond. That may not be necessary, Gaddis said. But Gibson can hold him until tomorrow without a hearing, and he's going to. He says he can find the gun by then. He's got the whole force out looking for it. I told Gaddis about my whiskey and the spot on the carpet before he left. We got the paper out at 2 o'clock by skipping lunch. Kent had worked steadily at a table in my office. He and I went out to a lunchroom and ate. The wind had dropped to a breeze. The sky was still leaden. Back in my office, we lighted smokes, and Kent picked up a sheaf of penciled notes. Here's an outline I've prepared of the Kendall case, he said. I'll read it. If you spot any holes or mistakes, you can fill them in or correct them. This was Kent's outline. James Kendall inherited the Kendall lumber and coal yards, one in Shelbyville and the other in Curtis, 20 miles west. James was the only child of Nathan Kendall, founder of the concerns. About a year before the death of his father, Kendall married his father's secretary bookkeeper. Kendall was a native of Shelbyville and had worked since boyhood in his father's yards. Upon becoming owner of the business, James Kendall got the get-rich-quick bug and began flirting with the market. He also got the ambitious idea of expanding his business to include a dozen more yards in the state. Before Kendall accomplished much towards the expansion, both the Shelbyville and Curtis yards were destroyed by fires which started within the same hour on a windy night. The fires were proven beyond a doubt to have been incendiary. Kendall, who was in Omaha in business at the time, blamed enemies who sought to prevent the expansion of the Kendall yards. The loss was fully covered by insurance, and it appeared at first that Kendall would suffer little financially. Then Kendall disappeared. He left his home on foot on the night of December 12, 1941, to attend a conference with insurance adjusters at the Shelby Hotel. He didn't arrive at the hotel and was never located afterward. It developed that Kendall had become so financially involved that the insurance money barely paid his debts. His wife was left with the home, a big 11-room house, and less than $300 in the bank. Chapter 2. Disputed Money's search for Kendall had begun to lose momentum when it was learned that the life of the missing man was insured for $400,000. Kendall had taken out the policies on the advice of Warren Hayes, president of the Shelbyville National Bank. At the time, Kendall was negotiating for a huge loan to finance expansion of his business, and Hayes had explained that the loan would be more easily obtained if Kendall would take out the large amount of insurance. After the fires and the following developments, the loan was forgotten. But the insurance remained. The first premium had been paid, and the policies were found among Kendall's papers. Mrs. Kendall was joint beneficiary with a non-existent business. She stood to collect the money if her husband was found to have died in any manner except suicide. Another premium on the policies came due. A local attorney, Lewis Jordan, investigated and found that under the law, Kendall would be legally dead if not found or heard from in 7 years. In that case, Mrs. Kendall could collect the insurance if she had kept up the payments. Mrs. Kendall mortgaged her home and made another payment. The insurance companies scented danger and began to investigate. The investigations were fruitless. That's as far as I got. Masters laid down his notes. And Kendall is still missing. And, I said, in 9 more days, Mrs. Kendall will be a wealthy woman. Bert served time in Joliet, I said. Do you love him? Maybe, Kent said tersely. Do you know how Mrs. Kendall has managed to keep up the premiums on those policies? As I have it from the natives, I told him. She mortgaged her home and then turned it into a boarding house for school teachers and others. In that way, she met the first 3 payments. Since that, Warren Hayes has loaned her the money as she needed it. The banker, Kent observed. Seems pretty certain that Kendall is dead, or permanently missing. So does Mrs. Kendall, I said. There is a strong rumor that she will become a bride soon after she is a legal widow. The groom-to-be is Martin Salm, a clerk in Holiday's department store. He's lame, a deformed foot. He boards at Mrs. Kendall's place. That's in our file, Kent nodded. What else do you know about Salm? He came here about 5 years ago, from San Francisco. Found work at Holiday's store. He stayed at the hotel for a time, then went to board with Mrs. Kendall. Been courting her since. I've heard he helps her pay the insurance premiums. Salm, Kent said, is definitely on the list of those with a motive to stop anybody from interfering with the collection of that insurance. He'd better have a good alibi for last night. Who else is on the list? I inquired. Everybody who has a chance to get their hands on a sizable hunk of that insurance, Kent replied. $400,000 is a lot of motive. That would mean Mrs. Kendall, Salm, and Warren Hayes. That I can think of. And Kendall, Kent added, if he isn't dead. You think Kendall may be in Shelbyville, in disguise? Possible, Masters said. An idea struck me. Salm, I exclaimed. He showed up here 2 years after Kendall vanished. We wondered about that. Kent shook his head. Our check shows that Salm has a crippled foot while Kendall was sound. Kendall would be 38 now. Salm registered in the draft as 35, which would make him 44 now. He looks older, I said. And, Masters went on, he bears no resemblance to pictures we have of Kendall. Also, Kendall was 30 pounds heavier than Salm is, and records show that Salm was working in a San Francisco fish market when Kendall disappeared. Then if Kendall is here in disguise, I asked, who could he be? You think about that, Kent said. Maybe you'll come up with something. I'm going to see Mrs. Kendall. Want to go along and introduce me? Sure, I said. The Kendall home was 3 blocks from the Clarion office. We set out on foot. This town got any gangsters? Kent asked as we walked. A professional killer who bumps off citizens at so much per head? Not to the best of my knowledge and belief, I chuckled. This is not Chicago. Dan Travis never got killed in Chicago, Masters retorted. The big white Kendall house stood on a quarter block of ground opposite the high school. Mrs. Kendall herself opened the door. 34 years old, Mrs. Kendall was a solidly built but shapely built brunette. She was neat in a blue house dress with her dark hair coiled close about her head. She looked capable and sure of herself. Before marrying James Kendall, she had been an efficient office assistant. There was little warmth in her welcome upon learning of Kent's business. I'm very busy, Mr. Masters, she snapped as we took chairs, and I'm very tired of being bothered by you detectives. I've stood it for 7 years and my patience is worn thin. My lawyer, Louis Jordan, is the person for you to see. Regardless of what you may think, Jim Kendall is dead. If he wasn't, he would have come back to me. He committed no crime. He foolishly lost most of the fortune left by his father. Fortunately, he left insurance enough to restore the fortune, and I'm going to collect that insurance. There was defiance in her voice. What do you think happened to your husband? Kent asked. I have always said that somebody killed him and disposed of his body, Mrs. Kendall replied. Probably the same person who set fire to the lumber yards. At any rate, my husband is dead. Dan Travis is also dead, Masters said. I suppose you'd like to blame me for that? She retorted hotly. Travis was killed by somebody who was scared by his investigation of this case, Kent declared. Well, I'm not scared, Mrs. Kendall snapped, and I'm not even going to pretend I'm sorry about Travis. If you detectives wouldn't snoop around in the business of respectable people and... Her eyes narrowed, and her mouth closed resolutely. Where were you at 9 o'clock last night? Masters asked. I was right here all evening. I played cards with Mr. Salm and 2 of the school teachers from about 8 until after 10. She glared at Kent and added, I'm not going to answer any more questions. I didn't come to ask questions, Mrs. Kendall. You've asked plenty, she sniffed. What did you come for? I've told you I'm busy. I came, Kent answered, to give you one chance to escape consequences soon to develop. We have no desire to bring hardship on a woman if it can be avoided. If you will tell the truth about this entire conspiracy and sign a voluntary confession before Mr. Porter, you will not be prosecuted, and the money you have paid in premiums will be refunded. Otherwise, you will have to face the music with the others involved. A derisive sniff was her only answer. Well? Kent asked quietly. You are crazy as well as a meddler, she flared. Will you please go and leave me to finish my work? As you say. Kent got up. But I may as well tell you that whoever killed Dan Travis was too late to stop what he hoped to prevent. That's why I'm here. Justice is soon going to overtake all concerned in this plot. You would be wise to take advantage of my offer. If you change your mind, I'm at the Shelby Hotel in room 208. Think it over. Mrs. Kendall's eyes narrowed. She walked to the door and opened it. Will you please go? We went. I walked silently beside Kent for the better part of a block, puzzled by what he had said to Mrs. Kendall. You've been holding out on me, I accused presently. Not much, Kent said. What I said to the woman was mostly bluff, but it may produce results. Dan Travis must have scared somebody in some way. Mrs. Kendall saved me the trouble of seeing Sam just now. I'll check, of course, but the card game alibi will probably stand up. That leaves banker Hayes and Kendall. Hayes is out, I told him. His wife called the Clarion this morning to say that Hayes went to Curtis yesterday on bank business. Towards evening, he felt ill and decided not to drive home in the storm. He went to bed in the hotel where he grew worse, and a doctor had to be called during the night. Something he ate, his wife said. He's better now, but the doctor ordered him to stay in bed until tomorrow. The devil, Masters said. Looks like you've got to find Kendall, I observed. Or somebody with a so far undiscovered connection with this mess, Kent replied. We reached the hotel just before 4 o'clock. Chief Gibson rose from a chair in the lobby to meet us. His face was grim. Porter, he said, have you got a revolver? A .45? I felt my throat tighten. Why, yes, I answered. Where is it? Up in my room. I want to see it. I led the way to my room. Masters came along. What's up? I asked as we entered. Let's see the gun, Gibson growled. I went to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer. My revolver was not there. I hastily searched the other drawers. No gun. I turned to find Gibson holding a gun in his hand. He wore an unpleasant expression. This it? He handed me the weapon. It was dirty. Looks like it, I said after a brief inspection. Where did you get it? Found it in the alley ash can where Larrabee hid it last night. Gibson gloated. He took the gun from my hand. Does Bert admit that? I asked. No, Gibson answered. But he said you showed it to him not long ago. He knew where to find it when he wanted it. I felt cold. I had shown the revolver to Larrabee less than a week before. He was in my room talking while I repacked some things. Look here, Gibson, I said. If you wouldn't try so hard to convict an innocent man, you might find the real killer, someone connected with this Kendall affair. I've got the killer, Gibson declared. Larrabee is an ex-con and a firebug. The Kendall yard's burned. If he ain't connected with the Kendall business, what's he doing in Shelbyville? Innocent, my eye. He was thick-headed and stupidly prejudiced. I remembered two things. I introduced Kent Masters. Heard you was here, Gibson told Masters. Thought you might come around to see me. Hicktown cops can help sometimes. I've been very busy, Kent said. Neither offered to shake hands. I told Gibson about the spot on Kent's carpet and the mystery of my whiskey. Somebody, Gibson looked hard at me, had plenty of time to carry snow from the alley and let it melt on that rug. If people wouldn't try so hard to cover up for crooks, police work would be easier. Why, I took a step towards Gibson. Hold it, Chuck, Kent said. Yeah, Gibson grinned nastily. Keep cool. And don't worry about Larrabee's bond. There won't be any. He left the room. I looked at Kent, who frowned back at me. I was cold with anger and fear for Bert Larrabee. Charming fellow, the chief, Kent said. Are you still sure about this Larrabee? As sure as I am of myself, I declared. Let's have a snort of that whiskey, Kent suggested, grinning. I don't think you carried snow up and dumped it in my room. I poured liberal drinks. I needed mine. Kent drank half of his before he asked, when was Larrabee arrested in Chicago? In September 1941, I answered. When did the Kendall yards burn? The day before Thanksgiving, 1941, I exclaimed. Say, you should have pointed that out to Chief Gibson. Kent finished his drink. I wonder if we could see Larrabee before time to eat. I'm getting curious about him. I'll call Harrison Gaddis, I said. If we can see Larrabee, I'll have the cook fix him something to eat. It was 5:30 when the attorney, Kent Masters, and I reached the jail, 2 cells behind the fire engine house in the town hall. Chief Gibson inspected the tray I carried and was still grumbling about it as he led us into the cell corridor. He gets enough fancy grub to feed an army, Gibson growled. Funny how folks like to pet a killer. A man is considered innocent until he is proven guilty, Gaddis remarked. Gibson grunted and locked us in the corridor. Before Larrabee's cell, I introduced Kent and we talked with Bert for nearly half an hour. Gibson never said a word to me about your gun, Mr. Porter, Larrabee said when told of the chief's visit to me. Looks like Gibson foxed you into admitting something. Kent grinned at me. Before we left, I promised to bring a change of clothing and his razor to Larrabee before his hearing in the morning. We all told him not to worry. Gaddis left us at the door of the stay-away, bounded up the stairs, and found Masters covering Mrs. Kendall with a gun. Tion. Kent and I walked toward the hotel and dinner. It was still cold and cloudy. There was no wind. As Kent and I came out of the dining room at 7:30, Tom Dennison met us in the lobby. He was obviously the bearer of news. There's a bag here for you, Mr. Masters, the porter said. Came by express. I know, Kent nodded. Too heavy for the plane. Take it up to my room, will you? And open the window a little to air the place. I'll put it down when I come up pretty soon. Dennison got the bag and went up the stairs. I went to the cigar counter and got my Sioux City paper. Kent was asking Nick Summers for change. I'm going to put in a call to Chicago, Masters said. Stop in my room when you come upstairs, I said. I'll buy a drink. I'll be there, Kent promised, as soon as I talk to the office. There were no room phones in the Shelby Hotel. From the top of the stairs, I saw that the door of Kent's room was open. The lights were on. I heard the sound of a window being raised. Then I heard a sharp snapping sound and a strangled cry, followed by a heavy fall. I sensed tragedy. Kent, Nick, I yelled, come up here quick. I raced down the hall. Feet pounded the stairs. On the floor of room 208, beneath a slightly open window, Tom Dennison lay sprawled. Kent was beside me in the doorway. Dennison twitched and groaned. We moved toward him. Dead, Masters announced a few moments later as he rose from beside the now quiet form. My God, Nick Summers croaked from the doorway. Call the police and a doctor, Kent ordered. Hurry. The clerk ran down the hall. Masters closed the window and pulled down the blind. He faced me with a grim look on his lean face. Nobody came out of this room? He asked. No. Shot through the window as he opened it, Kent said, by somebody who thought he was me. Poor devil. I realized the truth of what Kent had said. Tom Dennison was a tall youth, about the same build as Masters. Both wore dark suits. Through the window, with his back to the light, the porter could easily have been mistaken for Kent. I'll bet dollars to dimes, Kent said. I can name 3 persons who will have perfect alibis for this. No takers, I said. Let's go to my room and I need stimulant. I led the way. The killer, Kent said as I poured whiskey, had to be somebody who knew what room I have and its location in the hotel. Who? Everybody in town knows the location of the rooms in this building, I said. Rotary and other clubs meet in the front parlor on this floor and use vacant rooms for cloak and powder rooms. Who knew my room number? Kent swallowed his drink. I told Mrs. Kendall. And Harrison Gaddis, I said, and Chief Gibson. They might have told others. Tom Dennison might have told somebody. You'd be surprised how such information gets scattered in a town like this. I grew up in one, Kent said. Kansas. Anyhow, 3 alibis are going to get a real shaking down when they are offered. My door was open. We heard Chief Gibson talking to Nick Summers. Then the chief was on the stairs. We went out to meet him. He grunted at us and went into Kent's room. After a quick look at Dennison's body, Gibson faced us. You touch anything in here? I examined the body, Kent said, and pulled down the shade. You're supposed, Gibson snapped, to know better than to monkey with things before. I thought the man might be helped, Kent explained, until I saw that hole over his heart, and I didn't want whoever shot through the window to do it again. Gibson scowled and ran up the window shade. There was a starred bullet hole in one pane of the upper sash. "This is one," I said, "that you can't blame Bert Larrabee for. Ex-cons usually have pals around," the chief retorted. "What was Dennison doing in here?" Masters explained. Gibson asked a few more questions and dismissed us, saying he might want us again after Dr. Cooper came. "What now?" I asked in the hall. "Check up on our 3 suspects," Kent answered. He led the way to the lobby where he entered the phone booth. I knew we had work to do. As I stood waiting by the cigar counter, Harrison Gaddis came through the street door. He had come to ask me more about my gun and Larrabee's knowledge of it. I floored him with the news of Dennison's murder. Masters came out of the booth shaking his head. "Mrs. Kendall," he said, "has been at home for the past 3 hours, completely surrounded by schoolma'ams. She says her boyfriend Saum came to the store after supper to dress windows." "Martin Saum," Gaddis said, "was working in a window when I passed Holliday's store a few minutes ago." "Perfect," Kent snorted. "Has himself on display. I suppose the window is in plain view of somebody all the time?" "There's the Brit lunchroom across the street," Gaddis nodded. "The window could be plainly seen from there." "And before asking," Masters said, "I'll bet it was. And Warren Hayes is probably under an oxygen tent in Curtis." "Oh no," Gaddis said. "Hayes will be home in the morning. I have some rather urgent business with him. I called him at Curtis this evening. He was up and had eaten." "What time was that?" Kent asked. "About half an hour ago." "Better and better," Kent growled. "Nobody could have done it, but somebody did." "I'd like to tell Bert Larrabee about this," I said. "He'd sleep better." I looked at Gaddis. "Do you suppose we could get in?" "I think so," the attorney nodded. "With Gibson over here, Lloyd Toller will probably be on duty. Toller is friendly. Let's go." I looked at Masters. "Or maybe you'd better stay here. A man who doesn't want you to live is running around loose with a gun." "A few years ago," Kent grinned, "we were not worrying about just one man with just one gun." It was beginning to snow as we stepped into the street. The wind was rising. Halfway down the block, we passed Holliday's store. Martin Saum was at work in a show window. His face was turned away, and he did not even look up as we passed. "That was Saum," I said. "Sitting pretty." Kent nodded, looking across the street to where a woman was frying hamburgers in a lunchroom window. Gibson's assistant, Toller, let us in to see Larrabee. Bert listened excitedly to our account of Dennison's murder. "Less than an hour ago," he exclaimed suddenly. "Say, I heard shots here about then. I thought one of the cops was shooting at the targets in the back room of the station. That room faces towards the hotel." We looked at each other in startled silence. "Young fellow," Kent said, "you might have something there. We'll look into it. Maybe you talked yourself out of this cage." He went to the door and rapped on the bars with some keys. "Let me know, Mr. Porter," Larrabee said as I turned to go. I promised. "How long have you been on duty, officer?" Kent asked, as Toller came to let us out. "About an hour," Toller answered. "Wasn't supposed to come on till 10, but Gibson phoned that Dennison had been shot. I was through supper, so I hustled right down." "Gibson was here alone?" Masters asked. "Always is," Toller nodded. "From 6 until 10. May we see your target range?" "Reckon so." Toller locked the corridor door and led the way. Silently, we filed through the cheerless corridor behind Toller. I had a feeling that the target range would hold a tangible clue to the mystery of the killings. Chapter 3. Suspicious Targets. The shooting gallery was in a long, narrow room at the rear of the building, behind the second-floor auditorium. Targets were arranged before a sandbag backstop at one end. There were racks of pistols, rifles, and riot guns. Kent's principal interest was in the windows. There were 3, all unscreened. From them, there was a good view of the hotel's rear windows. We could see into room 208, where Gibson stood while Dr. Cooper worked on the body of Tom Dennison. Kent walked around the room, looking at targets and guns. Then he thanked Toller and we left. It was snowing hard as we reached the street. The wind was stiff. "Gibson!" Harrison Gaddis exclaimed. "It's hard to believe." "What can we do?" I asked. "Toller will tell, 'Take it easy,'" Kent said, "until we see where else that bullet might have come from, and say, 'Could Gibson be Kendall?'" "No," Gaddis answered. Gibson was a deputy here when Kendall disappeared. He's been here for years. Masters shrugged. We rounded the corner, ducked into the wind, and moved toward the hotel. Sam was still draping a figure in Holliday's window. You said something this afternoon, I reminded Kent, about somebody with a so far undiscovered motive. Uh-huh, Masters grunted. He was not in a talkative mood. Do you fellows mind me staying along? Gaddis asked. Hell no, Kent said. We may need you. Where's the sheriff? Curtis, Gaddis answered. The county seat. We met Dr. Cooper leaving the hotel. Undertaker Enders was in room 208, preparing to remove the body. We could hear Gibson's voice. Kent led us into my room. He raised my window shade and we looked out. We could see the windows of the police gun room through the snow-filled night. We could also see across the whitening roofs of a shoe shop, a plumber's shop, and the wide holiday store, all one-story buildings. We could see the rear windows in the second story of the Brick Bank building. There was also a view of part of the alley that ran behind the hotel and between the bank building and the town hall. Sounds told us that Enders and his assistants were taking Dennison's body down the back stairs. We went into the hall. Gibson was watching the removal. Chief, Kent said, come into my room a minute. Kent stood by the window and faced Gibson's frown. Gaddis and I stood against the wall. Did you do any shooting in your target room tonight, Gibson? Kent asked. Yes, Gibson said. I shot. What time was that? Kent cut in. Just before. Gibson hesitated. Say, what is this? I fired some test bullets from Porter's gun to compare with the one we found in Travis. That's what you say, Kent snapped. Look out this window. Gibson strode to the window. Clear view of this window from your gun room, Kent pointed out. Range about 40 yards. You were there when that rifle bullet killed Dennison, and there were plenty of guns handy. Why? By God. Gibson's face paled, then purpled as he whirled on Masters. I had never realized that Kent carried a gun, but there was one in his hand. Easy, Gibson. Kent's voice was brittle. Sit down in that chair beside you. We'll talk a bit, and don't go for your gun. I've had lots of practice at live targets. Gibson sat down. Gaddis and I remained frozen. You were shooting alone in the gunroom, Kent said. At the time when Dennison was killed, the bullet came from that direction. You were alone at the police station last night from 6 until 10. You could have slipped over here and shot Travis and— Hold on, Masters, Gibson snarled. I was in the hotel when Larrabee got back from chasing. Then you've changed your mind, Kent stopped him. About Larrabee chasing the killer? No, I ain't, Gibson yelled. And I was at the station last night when Nick Summers called to— All right, Kent said. What about tonight? You shot Dennison from the gunroom thinking he was me. Then you hurried to your office and waited for the telephone to ring. The chief glared. He seemed to be choking on words. I was tense. Gaddis was apparently enjoying himself. There is more evidence against you in Dennison's murder than there is against Larrabee and that of Travis, Masters went on. There is enough to hold you. You can't do that, Gibson growled. Want to bet? Kent asked. I can have it done. I am a licensed operative of the Brent Agency, in all states. You'll be in that cell next to Larrabee in short order, unless— Kent hesitated. Unless what? Gibson demanded. Unless you let Larrabee out to sleep in his own bed and quit horsing around and give me a little cooperation. Threatening an officer, Gibson barked. Intimidation of— I'm sure these other gentlemen were not listening, Kent said soberly. What were you saying, Mr. Masters? Gaddis asked. Gibson snorted. I was too puzzled to say anything. I was wondering if Kent didn't think Gibson guilty. I was just pointing out to Chief Gibson, Kent went on, that both Travis and Dennison were killed by somebody who was gunning for Brent operatives. I mentioned that solving the Kendall case would probably turn up the killer, and asked the chief to help. I also pointed out the obvious innocence of Bert Larrabee and suggested his immediate release from the clink. Oh, Gaddis said gravely. I'll pay closer attention from now on, Mr. Masters. Nuts, Gibson blustered. You know I didn't shoot Dennison. I can make out a case for the proper authorities, Kent retorted. That will keep you in your own pokey while the investigation proceeds. What do you want to know about the Kendall business? Gibson twisted in his chair. All you know, Masters replied, and anything in your files that you may have forgotten. Gibson shot a dark glance at Gaddis and me, then faced Kent. "All right," he growled, "but my turn is coming." "Let's go," Kent said. "I imagine Larrabee is getting pretty tired of that cell." In the hall, Gibson suggested that we go by way of the alley. "Shorter in this storm," he said. The wind was now howling. Snow driven by it was getting thicker. It was growing colder. I thought of my whiskey, but didn't mention it. "I'll be right behind you," Kent told Gibson, "with both eyes open. Chuck and Mr. Gaddis can follow me, and the rest of us are saying nothing until you have told Officer Toller to release young Larrabee and send him to your office." Gibson grunted. We filed down the back stairs and along the alley. At the station, Gibson gave Toller the required order. Toller looked surprised but went jangling keys. We went into Gibson's private office, leaving the door open. Bert Larrabee came quickly. He was haggard and rumpled, but he looked happy. He kept looking warily at Gibson. He began thanking everybody. Kent stopped him. "Young fellow." Kent glanced at his, continued on page 96. Fiesta of Murder. It was Cinco de Mayo, Mexican Day of Fiesta.